Hello, this is Dr. Mercola, and today we're going to talk about a very important topic, that is the water you and your family drinks. You know, none of us can last more than a few days without water because we'll die of dehydration. So it really is a crucial topic. Each and every one of us need a high quality water supply. So what are the options? Well, ideally, your best option to get the highest quality water you can possibly achieve is really from getting it from a mountain spring. Now, fortunately, there are resources you can do this, and typically many of these mountain springs, there's no charge to get them. All you have to do there is go to these springs. Even non-mountain springs at sea level would be fine too. Not quite as good as a mountain spring, but they're there. There's a resource called findaspring.com that you can go to, and you can find a local spring, and that would be the best. Now, of course, there's some time, effort, and energy involved, but if you can do that, that's certainly what I would recommend. And next down the line is a well water, and typically there's not going to be any fluoride, and there have far less contaminants involved. Fortunately, I live in a property that has a well, so I'm able to have this type of water. And many of the wells, however, will still need some filtration to improve and optimize the system. But I would say 90% of people viewing this are getting their water supply from a municipal water supply, and that is loaded with problems, and that's what I want to discuss now. Typically, in a municipal water supply, you're going to find things. I would say 90% of those water supplies are fluoridated, at least in the United States. And there is a challenge. If you don't believe it's a challenge, please look on my website. But it is a significant issue, and it's particularly problematic because it's very difficult to remove, even with the best water filter systems. It's really almost impossible to get 100% of it out. But then, you know, the average person in this country is, at least in the United States, is taking 13 drugs a year. And what do you think happens to those drugs? Well, when you swallow them, they're excreted in your urine or your stool, so they wind up in the water supply. Or if you don't wind up not taking them, you throw them in the garbage, they typically will wind up eventually in the water supply too. So these drugs are in the water, and they're typically not removed from a traditional water filtration system. And then the distribution systems, the water comes from the water filter plant to your home, and then from your home into your faucet through pipes. And the pipes can be made of a variety of different materials, which can also add to the problem. But of course, the most common additive and concern in a water supply would be chlorine. And chlorine is, of course, added to improve or decrease the likelihood that you're going to get sick. So thankfully, in most Western countries, the chlorine has virtually eliminated all those types of problems. But it does so at a cost. And the cost is that the chlorine, it's not normal. It's not only going to kill back pathogens in the water, but also kill your own gut infections. But even more importantly, and this is the real risk, is the chlorine can combine with organic material in the water and in your body to form something that's called a disinfection byproduct, or a DPB for short. The most common ones would be trihalomethanes or indole acetic acids. So these are dangerous because they're about 10,000 times more dangerous than chlorine with respect to increasing cancers and causing other complications and problems. So this is definitely something you do not want in your water supply. So I think it's pretty clearly established that if you have a municipal water supply, and most likely even if you are in a well water system, you really do need a filter, and you're going to benefit from a filter. And I think the key point here is that any filter, I want to emphasize, any filter is better than no filter, no matter what it is. Because if you don't have a filter, you become the filter. So what are the other options? Well, clearly there are bottled water or filtered water. And I believe bottled water really isn't a good long-term option. Sure, if you're at a conference or you're at a seminar or for a weekend, it's probably not a bad idea. But on a regular basis, it's not a good idea for a number of reasons. There's large, significant environmental reasons, because you actually have to pay for the fuel to transport water, and it's very heavy, of course, 8 pounds a gallon from point A to point B where you're going to be consuming it. But then there's also how you're storing it. That you're storing it in a container, typically plastic. Glass, of course, is better, but that's not typically available. And plastics, ideally, you would want to get a BPA and phthalate-free one. But even if they are BPA and phthalate-free, there's other chemicals in there. You don't know any idea of what the consequences of chronic exposure that's going to be, because there's so many things we don't know about health. And plastics we know are not natural or healthy. And there's going to be an increased amount of these toxic components in the water. The longer you store them, or the hotter temperature you store them. So these plastics do leach, so you have to be really careful. And don't put them in the sun either. That's another factor. So That's one big issue. But another issue is actually, who's looking at these water supplies? And it's important to know that most municipal water supplies are regulated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, and they're relatively stringent standards. But when we come to bottled water, it's regulated by the FDA. The EPA has nothing to do with it, and the only requirement is it be as good as tap water. And so it's potentially problematic, and I'd definitely discourage it. There's a lot of potential for fraud in this area, and deception, and people companies advertising it as mineral water or bottles or spring water when it really isn't. So there's a lot of area for confusion. So occasionally it's a good idea, but I would definitely encourage you to stay away from bottled water. If you're going to use it, certainly the 5-gallon ones that are delivered to your home make the most sense, but the small pint or quart containers on a regular basis just is not a good long-term strategy. So what types of filtration systems are there? Well, they're broadly based into 3 different types. One of the ones is distilled water, and I think most people recognize that's not really an ideal form. I'm not a big fan of distilled water for a variety of reasons, and I've actually written articles on that. Destructures the water, it's devoid of minerals, and has other complications, and I would review my previous articles on that if you're interested. And then, of course, the one that's really not a water filter system is alkaline water, and I've also addressed this in a previous article. And that's a process. It's not a filtration system. It's a process that's applied to water. And I'm not a big fan of alkaline water, as are most of the experts that I've interviewed, for a variety of reasons. And I just think that there's better ways to do that, and personally I would not use it. But that leads us to 2 primary ways, which is the reverse osmosis system and a carbon-based system. And RO systems is something I used in my home personally for the last 15 years or so. And it's a really high-quality process that will remove most of the fluoride, certainly not all of it, and most of the disinfection byproducts, the DPBs, and the volatile organic compounds, and most all the contaminants that you'd be concerned about that I mentioned previously. The problem with it is, and there are some problems, is that it removes many of the beneficial minerals, so it becomes relatively hungry for these, and it can cause complications. So it's easily solved, and I solve it by putting a healthy mineral back in. And typically I use Himalayan salt, about a 1/4 teaspoon per gallon, and just stir that in really well. And then I actually put the water in the refrigerator prior to use, because getting it down to 39 degrees, there's been some studies that suggest that restructures the water, and that is one of the other side effects of RO systems, that it will destructure the water. And there's a beneficial structure to high quality water, and that's something you want to integrate into that. So that really leads us to carbon filters. And carbon filters are really a phenomenal solution for most people and to consider. And really one of the ways that you can discriminate and identify a high quality filter is by looking at the certification process. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, there's an independent third-party objective agency called NSF that really establishes these criteria and levels of quality of water that you can easily look for. Then what type of filter do you get if you're going to use a carbon filter? Well, there's basically 3 different types of systems. One that's going to address your whole house, like this system here. One that's a point of use that you typically put on your kitchen tap, and another is in your shower. And we'll talk about each of these. First, about the whole house. Now, 90% of people or so use municipal water systems, and if you're one of those, fall into that group, then there's an important point to consider that you probably don't realize. I didn't realize until I started looking at this more carefully, and that the chlorine that's in the water supply and the disinfection products are all volatile. That means they evaporate. And just as you can, one of the tricks that you can use, like if you're in a restaurant and you don't want to pay for bottled water for a number of reasons, well, then you can just say, I'll just have the regular tap water, but just let that tap water sit for half hour, and the chlorine and the disinfection byproducts will volatilize. Well, just like that's going to volatilize in that glass of water in the restaurant, it's also going to volatilize in your toilet. And if you've got a few toilets in your house, it's a significant volume of water, especially if you're flushing them regularly, that's going to evaporate these dangerous gases into your home. So your indoor air quality will actually decrease quite substantially. And that's actually one of the benefits, if you're on a municipal water system, of using one of these systems, that your indoor air quality improves because you're not vaporizing chlorine and disinfection byproducts into your home. So if for some reason you don't have that, remember, again, any filter is better than none. If you don't have one, that's fine. Just make sure, even in the winter, that you're opening up your windows, preferably a window on each side of the house so you get cross ventilation for about 5 to 10 minutes a day, so you can exhaust those gases from your home, because it's not good for you or your family to be breathing those gases. But you can eliminate that by using one of these systems. Now, if you have a municipal water supply, then this system works great. If you're on a well water like me, then you're going to have one customized. You actually have to have your water tested to see exactly what's in your specific water, so a specific solution can be designed for your water supply. Now, interestingly, what I didn't realize is that one of these whole house water filters can actually substitute for a water softener. I've actually eliminated my own water softener now and just use this exclusively, which is phenomenal, and it really cuts down on the maintenance and the headaches, because a system like this really, for the most part, every few months or so, it just has to have the pre-filter changed. And it's a relatively easy thing to do. You just remove that cartridge, put a new cartridge in, and that's it. And those are relatively inexpensive. And the whole cost per gallon, now admittedly you're not going to be drinking all the water that's coming through here because it's going through your toilets and you're washing your clothes with it, you're showering, but it's only 0.003 cents per gallon. That's pretty inexpensive water, because these media filters will actually last about 300,000 gallons of water. Now, if you live in a big house, it's important to know that you actually may need 2 of these, because a house any bigger than about 3,200 square feet or about 3.5 bathrooms will require additional units, because the water pressure tends to go down as you have a lot of water use. So it will filter the water just fine. It's just that you may notice a difference, a drop in your water pressure. So that's an important point to consider. Definitely something to, these are relatively inexpensive. I mean, there are some reverse osmosis whole house systems may cost $5,000 or $10,000, and clearly I would strongly discourage you against using something like that, because unless you have the special pipes, because most of the time if you have the wrong types of plumbing in your system and you use reverse osmosis, it could cause tremendous damage. You have to be really careful with those. So that brings us to the next point, and actually a type of system that you'd want to use in conjunction with this is a point of use, because this system is typically installed where the water comes into your home. So then you still have the pipes that the distribution system within your own home. The pipes lead from this to your actual point of use, whether it's your kitchen or your bathroom. So the water coming out of there could be contaminated from the pipes in your home. So that's why it's probably a good idea to have a point of use filter also. And so those can be over the counter or under the counter. And again, you want to look at the same points I mentioned earlier with the NSF certification. You want to make sure it has, another point to consider is that most of the higher quality units are going to have 2 stages. And you want to, in other words, 2 containers of the media filter, because it's really difficult, if not close to impossible, to get a high quality filtration process going with only 1 container. So that's sort of a big clue, as if you're looking at a high quality system. So and some of the ones I recommend actually use in my own home are actually listed below here, so you can read that for more information. But then lastly, probably one of the most important points is the shower filter. And, and if you only could buy 1 filter, only use 1 filter in your home, probably the most important one is going to be relatively one of the least expensive ones, and that's a shower filter. You're saying, why? I'm not drinking my shower water. Well, the reality is you are, and that most people don't understand that when you bathe in the shower, you're actually volatilizing many of these compounds like the chlorine and the disinfection byproducts at a higher rate, because typically it's a hot shower, and then your skin is actually absorbing this, so that if you take a shower for about 10 minutes or so, that you're absorbing the equivalent of drinking 1 gallon of the same water. So it's a significant issue, because most people take showers longer than 10 minutes, or certainly if you're taking a bath, you have a similar issue. So because if you could use a shower filter for your bath, many people have the showers and the bath connected, so you just fill up your bathtub instead of bathing in that. So that's a simple process. So remember, you're going to need a high quality source of water on a regular basis. It's really an essential, crucial component of your long-term health plan, because if you can get away with something once in a while occasionally, but on a regular basis, if you're making a mistake in this and you're inputting into your system or your family system these relatively toxic chemicals over the long term, there's going to be health consequences. There's no question about it. So remember, the key principles here is that any filter is better than no filter, and if you don't have a filter, you're the filter. So please, for you and your family's sake, make sure you have a filter, a high quality filter, that you and your family can take control of your health.